This meeting is going to be recorded.
Good evening. Welcome to the October 2021 OLUG meeting. A couple of quick announcements. We have a speaker for next week or next month. It's Chad Homan. And what are you going to talk about, Chad?
Securing your repository
Securing your repository.
in projects.
That's good. In December, we will have our usual short topics and a little social time after that. And then I will be putting a call out probably towards the middle of this month for 2022 presentations. So if you're interested, please let me know. We had a really good year as far as different people doing presentations and always having one in the pipe. So I'd like to keep that going. I don't have a lot of it. It's been a really good month for me not to be able to be on social media and tracking Linux news. So I don't have a lot. I just suggest that everybody check your memes for the Facebook memes because they are pretty funny. And anybody else want to say something about Linux for the last month?
RHEL-P.4 is cloud and edge ready, baby. It
Okay.
works.
All right,
So if you guys use cloud and edge Blue Kickstarter, something else, it works.
excellent.
Ubuntu 21.10 is out next week, and Fedora 35, I want to say, is out. We got the
Oh no, I'm too behind on
beta's
Fedora.
out.
I'm curious, like a poll of the group for enterprise Linux alternatives, now that CentOS is sadly more. What are we looking at? Are we looking at Rocky, Alma, Cloud Linux? What are we looking at as that free alternative to a RHEL subscription?
I've been using Rocky. I've had no problems with it. For a while, I was actually working with the test group for the new stuff. I'm hoping to get back to that in the next month or two, hopefully before 8.5 drops.
Okay. So they have like an 8.4 that's kind of
Yep.
very compatible with RHEL 4.
Bug for bug
Yeah,
compatibility.
no, for bug, that's fine. Do they host their own
All
codes and all that stuff?
Yep.
Yeah.
Alma came out with a conversion script, I think,
Yep.
first to shift gears and then sort of getting.
Yeah, I'm still playing with that.
Yeah, Rocky's got, I think they've got a conversion script too, so. And they have a couple of interesting images. They do have an ARM image. I don't know how mature it is. And they have a couple things. It's been very easy to engage with the community to get questions answered. So that's always high on my list.
I might agree with the Ubuntu server. It's probably that last. It's worked well.
Yeah,
No.
I mean, as an organization at Kiewit, we picked Ubuntu first and then we go to enterprise if the vendor requires it for whatever this godforsaken app is. So it's been good for us, honestly.
All right.
So he's planning to go to Rocky Linux.
So I'm going to turn this over to Ben Watson, who's going to talk about some interesting things I'm interested in.
Well, some things I'm interested in. More better, complicated, but powerful playbooks and molecule. So we go.
All right, let's try this mic. Again. Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Great. I'll just share desktop one. Share. And we'll get Dave out of the way. All right, I'm here. let's go present mode. All right, so last time I talked to you guys, I talked about AWX, which is a upstream open source version of Ansible Tower, which is a commercial Red Hat offering. Kind of showed you, what it could do. Assuming you had playbook content already, you could use Tower to give some, maybe less skilled people a GUI to click a rocket ship to run your playbooks that you'd authored, or you could invoke the REST API to trigger playbook runs, or you could even have a schedule. And so we still use AWX. I just upgraded it 2 weeks ago on a Friday night, and I'm still kicking butt. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit more about the content side of things with Ansible, roles and collections, and just some things I learned to make your life a little bit easier. So kind of the agenda, I'm going to recycle the About Me page I used last time. Little elevator speech. What's a role? What's a collection? How would you use a role or collection in a playbook? And then we'll get into testing roles with Molecule, some demos throughout. I'll probably have a lot more demos than slides. Actually, I've only got like 10 slides and 2 of them say C code. So probably just mostly a lot of me hand waving and showing stuff live. I use VS Code as the editor. I'm a dark theme guy. So if it's not showing up on your screen or if you can see it here, I can try light theme, but my retinas don't like it. So went to UNO about that time. Been doing automation for a long time. Started off in robots at a local medical robot company that went bankrupt. Then went to DoD contracting for quite a long time, and now I've been at Kiewit for the last 3.5 years or so. A lot of what I use for automation, I like Jenkins still for continuous integration and delivery and just generic scheduling. Ansible I've come into about, 6-7 years ago, back in the before 1.0 days. So I've been around Ansible for a long time, and I just gravitated toward it. The barrier to entry is pretty low. It's agentless. It's all this good stuff, and it's gotten much more sophisticated and albeit a little bit more complicated, but you can still start off simple. And then I use PyAuto GUI and Protractor for automating like the desktop, right? If you need to automate mouse moves or web page clicks or whatever, you can do that. So helps out with testing. And I'm an OLUG lurker for life. But now we have that Discord, so I've participated in that a little bit more. I was always a mailing list reader, never really a contributor, so I apologize for that, but it is what it is. So elevator speech, what is Ansible? I think we've had a couple other talks, other presenters have talked about it, but Michael Bahan developed it 8 years-ish ago. I think he came out of Red Hat with Puppet. So he learned what he learned with Puppet. He also wrote Foreman, I believe. Yeah. He took what he learned and he's like, hey, maybe there's a better way to do it. And so he came up with this project called Ansible. And unlike Puppet or Chef or some of these other tools or SCCM, if you're a Windows shop, this is agentless. You don't need an agent running on a privileged port. So it's a hub and spoke, from inside out. You can also invert that control. You can run kind of an agent mode if you want, but it's agentless by design. Written in Python. Started off just Linux only with SSH, has grown into Windows and clouds and all this other stuff. There's so many modules now, it just really boggles the mind. So written in Python, but you don't need to know Python to use it. In fact, the only thing you really need to know is YAML. YAML is a nice, whereas XML and JSON are machine to machine, not really intended for human formats, in my opinion. YAML is intended for humans. It's much easier to write. No curly, you don't have to have curly braces and commas and all sorts of stuff. It's a superset of JSON actually, so you can go from one to the other pretty quick. You can think of Ansible in a couple different modes. Declarative state configuration, DSC is what they often call it. You can also use it as an orchestrator, like, hey, I need to execute this thing on these servers and then this. So if you wanted to bring up like a stack, like bring up the database, bring up the middleware, bring up the web server. You could do it like that. And then you can also think about it as just raw SSH or PowerShell even on steroids. You get scaling for free with Ansible. That's the cool part about it. So yeah, I'm not going to cover a lot of the high level stuff. This is a little bit more advanced topics on like writing stuff better to make it a little bit more maintainable, a little bit more reusable and portable, hopefully. And it's come a long way since I started. Michael sold it to Red Hat. I don't know, hopefully got a good mint for that. But since that, the community has just grown by leaps and bounds. There's just a lot more tooling in it now and a lot more versioning to drive you bonkers. But it's all for good, right? It's all for good. So let's talk about what is an Ansible role. A lot of what you probably see when you go into like an Ansible primer is a very simple, low barrier to entry. Here's a playbook, right? It starts off with the playbook name, which host do I want to target my inventory, and then just a list of tasks, right? Well, an Ansible role is kind of like a function in a programming language. So you'll find as you write playbooks that your task set can grow into the 10s, 50s, 100 tasks. And you'll find that if you look at them, you repeat yourself often. And you violate the concept of dry, don't repeat yourself, because it makes it maintenance harder, right? You have to go change it here, now you gotta go change it down here. So, in coding, when you get a big main method, you refactor functions. An Ansible role is kind of like refactoring a bunch of your tasks into a self-contained little function that itself is bigger than the individual tasks therein. So you can think of like an individual Ansible task, like a 1x1 Lego brick. An Ansible role could give you a composition of those bricks as a thing. And you could even have variables that influence its shape or color or whatever. I mean, this is a horrible analogy, but just roll with it. So, like I said, in Ansible, you can do everything with plays and playbooks, and that's how most people start. But when you want to get into more portability, reusability, using what the community has, you're going to want to learn what roles are and these new things called collections, and you're going to refactor it. I'm going to show you kind of how you can use roles and how you can develop them. And there's a tool called Molecule that can aid in the development of a role. And the power that is a self-contained role. It's really, I use it every day, and I've been using it for a long time now, and it still just works, and I'm amazed. So an Ansible role really is, it's a predefined kind of file and folder structure, okay, that Ansible understands, right? There's a folder called tasks, and then there's a file called main. So it's just like your main and C, right? It's your main method. So it understands that. So, once you get over that, okay, here's a folder structure, and there's tools to help you create that folder structure. So there's this folder structure, and in there you can define variables that the role will accept, so you can influence how your role behaves at runtime. You can have any number of tasks, and you can organize those tasks inside the role with multiple files if you want. You can include custom libraries. If you've written custom Python libraries that influence how Ansible works, you can include those. They're typically self-contained, like the folder structure doesn't depend on anything outside of it, right? So the role is all completely self-contained. Typically, it's its own Git repo. So if you go to galaxy.ansible.com and look for any roles, almost all of them have a link to GitHub, because that's where it sources all the content from. And so each role is typically its own Git repo. And once you get over that, you can publish it and share it with the world. If you have a open source license at your company, or you're just doing it yourself, you can publish it to galaxy.ansible.com. Or if you don't want to pull from there, you can actually just check it out directly from source control, and I'll show you how that works too. Plenty of time to learn these things. arrived with Ansible 2.9. 2.9 is still maintained right now, but there's other versions. So why collections? Well, in the beginning, right, back in the 1X days, Ansible was distributed as a batteries all included kind of pip install Ansible, and you got all the modules with it, you know, every time you installed it, right? Well, that was fine back when it was like 100 modules, right? You had copy modules and directory modules and other things, but now there's over 3,000 plus modules. And so it became very difficult for them to maintain. I mean, you can think about it, there's a bug in this module, I want to release that update to that, but I need to think about the core and all these other modules. So what they did was they're like, hey, let's divorce the execution engine piece, right? The core bit of Ansible, and then all this other content. And so that's what they did. They came up with these things called collections, and that allowed them to offload, like VMware has a collection. If you want to manage VMware, there's collections for AWS itself, for Azure, for AWS. And those individual vendors can manage that content independently of the engine. And then you can just bring them together. So you can still bring them together in kind of a batteries included way. Today, in fact, if you pip install the latest version of Ansible, you will get the core plus whatever the community has decided, all the collections that should be included in that. So you'll get all those batteries. But if you're missing some, I'll show you how you can install more. So I think we've, yeah, kind of covered all that. All right, so now I'm gonna do some hand wavy stuff. How would you use an Ansible role or collection in a playbook? So what I've put together, I guess before I move on to this, you can follow along. Let me escape out of there. So I created on my GitHub page, you can follow me, I'm Watson B on GitHub. I've got 3 repositories just for this meeting, just for you. A playbook example called AP OLUG, kind of an inventory example called AE OLUG, that stands for Ansible Environment, that's what I call it. And then a role example called Hello World, okay? So you can clone these and I'll show you how they all kind of work together. In my opinion, these 3 things represent a 3-legged stool of a great Ansible adventure. You've got roles that are self-contained, that are reusable. You've got playbooks that are ideally simplified because you're using roles, and therefore they're also really reusable. And then you've got inventories that encapsulate all the domain-specific configurations that influence how your roles work and plays work. And that way, by keeping these 3 things divorced, you can bring your playbooks and roles wherever you go, and you just make a new inventory for your new client, right? And so you can recycle the same stuff, but use it for a different client, a different network domain, or whatever. So here is my GitHub. I'm Watson B. You can clone these. They should be public. Yeah, they're public. And you can submit a pull request if you found a problem. So I use VS Code for editing Ansible. There's some cool extensions in VS Code for YAML itself. Ansible linting, you can get a plugin for that. Red Hat maintains a plugin for Ansible that kind of does some other stuff. Gives you some red squigglies when it sees bad practices, all this other stuff. But we'll get into that with Molecule as well. So let's get into an example. So I asked the question, how would you use a role in a play or playbook, right? So there's got to be a better way to get more real estate here. Let's just hide this first. And we'll hide this. So here's kind of like your traditional, this is, so none of the stuff I'm going to show you today is like real, right? I'm just echoing stuff. I'm not making real changes. I can show you that if you want. But for brevity, time, I just want to run stuff quick. So this is my playbook number 1, your classic, task after task after task example, right? You're just, this could be 100 tasks. And if you're a good person, you put actual, like the name of the task, what's it really doing? It's installing a package. It's configuring a config file. It's doing something, but I just wanted to show like, hey, this is how most people start, and that's fine. That's a good way to get started. So I can actually run this just for grins, I included an inventory in this project that you could target. And this just shows an example of an Ansible inventory in the YAML format. I've got, I don't know, how many, was that 25, 30 servers in here? They're not actual servers. If you notice, they all are just gonna locally connect to myself, right? Again, just for speed. So I could actually run, Ansible playbook plays 1-I inventories, lots of simulated hosts. And so if I just do that, get that out of the way. So it's just running a bunch of stuff. It doesn't look very good now. It's skipping a bunch of things. Why is that? Well, I've got all these debug messages and I've told it, you know, if the verbosity level I've passed it, the command line doesn't match something, don't print it out. So, you know, I can just increase it with the -V. And we can get all sorts of tips and tricks if you want to pick my brain after, but now you can see the actual message it's printing out. It's just printing out the name of the server with a number after it, the task number. Again, there's nothing magic here. So, yeah. So what's another way, if you didn't want to use roles, what's another way you could maybe help yourself out and organize things a little bit better, right? So you don't have to use roles, but you can still help yourself. So this is the long play example. You can create individual task files that themselves contain multiple tasks in it, okay? And then in your kind of outer main playbook, you can include those task files. Oh, okay. So what would that look like? That would look kind of like this. So again, this up here is the same. Here's an example of just a task. And now look at, now I'm importing these other tasks here. And then I'm running another task, and then I'm importing another set of tasks, right? So quick tip, your hosts here can itself be a variable that you can specify in the command line. So if you want to truly dynamically target a group or an individual host in your inventory, you can do it via the command line. So for example, let's run the second example here. It's the playbook plays number 2-I inventories, my big -E. So I'm going to specify a command line variable. I expect to see HG is up here. If I don't specify it, I'll default it to all, which is, as we saw earlier, let me just pull that up. So here's all, right? Every inventory has this notion of all implicit hosts. So if I don't specify that, you've already seen me run it, it targets all of them, but let's just say I want to target a one group of them, right? Let's say this group called 2. So -E HG equals 2. Excuse me. Oh. So you can see, and we'll turn up the verbosity so you can see the actual messages printing out. But there's certainly a lot fewer hosts this time, right? In fact, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 should be in that group called 2. And if you wanted, you could specify an individual machine. So we'll just target like server 01, right? Server dash, oop, those are in the wrong row. And so there's just that one box. I'll turn up the verbosity so you can see the messages. I keep forgetting to do that. Yeah. So again, this is just another example of kind of breaking your tasks up into maybe the name of the task file you include has some meaning, like database tasks. Oh, okay. Or web server tasks. You know, you could organize it, right? So now let's say we want to start using roles now. Okay, how would we do that? Let's get some more real estate here. Okay, so up at the top, same kind of, you know, variable is the host I want to target. I'm going to target the same inventory. This is the old school way of doing it. In the old school way, you had, what if I wanted to execute some individual tasks and then apply a role? And then what if I wanted to execute some more tasks after? You had to use this notion of a pre-task. And then you had to do all your roles one by one. You know, you could list them there. So here I'm going to actually apply this role twice, my custom OLUG hello world role. And then you could run some post tasks. there's a much better way to do it. But I'm just kind of taking you through the history of it here. So, okay, so I told you I have this role called ARO like hello world, right? It's just gonna, it's a hello world, you know, prints hello world. How do I use that, right? So it's a good question. In your playbook structure, what I recommend is you typically have a folder called roles. And the cool thing is, if you follow my way, AWX and Tower, they honor this out of the box. So typically I have a folder called roles. Notice the color of this is kind of like faded out. That's because my git ignore says ignore everything in this folder except for this one document called requirements.yml. And so this is an example of me, that little thing's probably in the way in it. Okay. So this is an example of me identifying what roles do I need in this playbook. Again, I could source them from Ansible Galaxy. So if you just do it like if you do it the lazy way, let's go get one of Jeff Geerling's roles, right? Because Dave and I both like Jeff Geerling. He's a pretty cool dude. So let's get his Nginx role. Let's say we wanted to use it. Let's say we wanted to install Nginx on a box using a role that somebody else wrote, because, you know, why reinvent the wheel, right? So Geerling guy.nginx is the name of the role. Copy. So I'm going to go back to my requirements role, and there we go. So this requirements file is here, and it's identifying now 2 roles that I need. Okay, well now, great, I've got them listed here. How do I use them? There's a tool called Ansible Galaxy. It's actually a command line tool. So you'd say Ansible-Galaxy install -r roles requirements, and then where do you want to stick them? I stick them in that roles folder. And so it's telling me I already had Hello World installed, and then it went out. Look at that! It went out to Ansible Galaxy, and it downloaded and extracted this role from Jeff Geerling. So now I can use it, right? So again, using it, and I'm not going to use his role because I'm not going to install Nginx on my laptop. I'm not going to do it 100 times, but so that's kind of how you apply the role here. You have a role section, you just list the role you want to apply, right? So let's just run this. This is not using Jeff's, it's using ours, our custom one. So Ansible playbook plays 3 and -I inventories, my big inventory. We'll say -E, I think it was HG equals target group number 1 -V. And so get some output here. And you'll see the output kind of changes a little bit, and we'll go over that. So, all right, so okay, so here's the name of my play was, you know, using roles the old style way. I did some fact gathering on this to demonstrate fact gathering. We'll get into that when we do molecule and stuff. Here's that pre-task I ran, and I intentionally, you know, all shell commands, or I intentionally said, hey, make sure this task emits a change, just to demonstrate that you can run a handler after doing a change. Now look, look how it's kind of changed here. So here is my pre-task, and now we're getting into, look at that. Here's the name of my role, and then here's the name of the task in my role. So we're including files that are specific to the system, which in this case I discovered it was a Linux system, so I'm going to call the Hello Linux task. That's why I had to gather facts before. And then here's another name of a task that's inside that role. So when you're doing output and it's sequentially printing out, you can see it going from role to role to role. And yeah, we should see this. Hello World was applied, and it printed out Hello World just like it should have. All right, now let's look at the new way to do importing roles, which is better, because the old way was like, hey man, I got these tasks I can do up here in this section, then I have to do all my roles, then I can do some more tasks after. What if I wanted to do some tasks in between the roles? Well, you couldn't do it with this whole way. You're just kind of screwed. You might have to split up into separate playbooks, but we don't want to do that. So here's a new way, and this is the way I recommend. Let's go look. So I've named the task kind of the same. Here's my pre-task. It's going to forcefully emit a change to run a handler. Now we're going to apply my hello world role using this new thing called import role. So it's going to import my role and apply it. Then we're going to do another task in the middle. And then we're going to apply that role again, and then we'll do another post task. So this is number 4, importing roles. So Ansible playbook plays 4-I. Inventory is my big old inventory. -E HG equals, we'll just target number 2, do a -V, and we'll get some. Now notice I'm not running Ansible Galaxy again. It's already installed, right? I already did it once. I could delete those out of there, and I will next time. I'll delete them out. You'll see how it errors out. Can't find your role. But when we get into role writing and molecule, it does the same kind of thing. So it worked, right? Let's just go through here and let's just kind of schwack these away. Delete. Okay, so I deleted hello world. If I try to run this again, it's gonna say, oh my gosh, Ben, you needed this role. It's hello world. It's not, I can't find it. It's not there. So again, Ansible Galaxy is your friend. There we go. Installed it again. Now I can run it. And it works. So that's kind of how you install roles into your playbook and use them. Now you can go out and survey Ansible Galaxy. I mean, it's a searchable monster. I mean, if you can think about it, somebody's probably written a role to do it. You know, Nginx, Apache. Do you have a question?
Yes,
Yes.
on the previous screen, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
It said that Gearlinks was already installed.
Yep.
If there was a newer version, would it tell you there was a newer version?
No. I think there's a way you can query it. Here's a quick tip for you. So notice for my roles that I author, and I have 120 of them at Keywood. I always target a very specific tag or branch of the Git repo. I mean, this is bad. I target master. Some people say you shouldn't do that because you never know what you're going to get. I know what I'm going to get because I don't release the master unless I've tested the crap out of it with Molecule, right? So I tag master. So if I run it again, it's going to say, hey, you've already got master installed. You know, wrong command. So it's going to just blow over it. Here, what you can do at the end. This is what I recommend: -- force. Go get it. Go get it again. So it's always going to go out there and forcefully go get it and re-extract it. So obviously you can pin this if people are using semantic versioning or something. If you depend on version 1.0.1, you can go grab that. This is kind of like a free-for-all here too. It's just going to get the latest version of Geerling Guy Nginx. But if you do that force, it'll re-grab it. Good question. All right. So finally, I'll kind of show, like, I guess before we get into molecule and stuff, more the ideal world, right? This is my ideal world, where your plays are basically just importing roles. It just makes your plays so much easier. So this is an example of orchestration and desired state and scaling, you know. So I can target that big old list of servers if you want, and then I can visit them in sequence, right? This play is going to set up my database servers. So pretend that this role is installing Postgres or Oracle or whatever. And then this play is going to target my app servers. It's going to set up my middleware like JBoss or, you know, WebLogic or whatever. And then this next one's going to hit my web servers and set up, you know, Nginx or Apache, and then maybe an AJ proxy load balancer, because why not, right? So, but notice each of these plays, all it's doing is doing these role imports. It's doing hardly any tasks. All the handlers and individual tasks and variables are contained in this role. And it just makes your plays so much easier to read and use. So I have another inventory for this, which is different than this other one. So let's go back over here. So here's my kind of big list of fake servers, right? There's not really anything in there. It puts them into groups. These groups are, you know, not named very old. 1, 2, 3, okay, whatever. I've got another example. And this is that third leg of the three-legged stool. So you've kind of seen playbooks and how you can install roles. Those are two of the legs. Now I can convince you that you should also have an inventory that is separate and source controlled on its own. And you can have multiple of those repositories that are per network enclave, per customer, per however you want to do it. So that way you can recycle your playbooks and roles and influence the entire behavior just with those inventory files and the parameters they define. So I've got that. It's called AEO lug right here. So this is just an example. And again, you can version it however you want. So I created an inventory called site because I had no other good name. And that's what people always call it when you see Ansible and you're like, oh, but whatever. So in here, I define, again, another YAML structure. Again, I'm just connecting to myself, but ideally this Ansible connection would not be set to local. You would actually be connecting to these machines. Maybe these are their DNS names. By the way, if they're not their DNS names, you can easily just say Ansible host and put in whatever its IP is, right? You could do that. So, typically I target DNS names. But, if there's any failure that's going to get you, it's going to be DHCP, DNS, or BGP, right? So be careful. Be careful out there. Yeah. So okay, this inventory is pretty simple. It's a little bit different than the one before. I've grouped them into named groups: my database servers, app servers, web servers, load balancers. There's 3 databases here, 3 database servers, 3 app servers, 3 web servers, because we like everything in threes. But also notice I've defined this extra little variable here called hello world message. What is that? Well, my role, Oleg hello world, is down here. And if we look at the default variables for that role, I expose to the person using this role a variable that they can set to whatever they want. So in this case, it's just what's the message that's going to be printed out. And so what I'm demonstrating here is that this role exposes a variable. And if you look at the README, and again, please feel free to clone these, but the way I've set my README, it's Markdown, Control-Shift-V. So if you look at it here, it renders right nicely on GitHub or Galaxy. And this is kind of what the community has. Typically a newspaper headline of what does this role do, right? I like to put build badges in mine because I like to know if it's working or not. What's the current version of it? You can actually link to the version document for version history. And then a little table down here to kind of give you like a rundown of here's the variables that this role exposes to you. Is it required or not? What's its default value? Do you have any choices? And then, what does this variable do, right? And so you'll see a lot of that on Galaxy if you go like Jeff's README here, right? So he's got a markdown, and this rendered his markdown, and this is the way he chose to do it. Yeah, you can do examples, right? In Markdown, you can do examples. Here's an example of your YAML, right? So in fact, just to flex a little bit, I said I have 100 and some odd roles. So I've got a playbook that actually generates this README here, which shows the status of all of my inventory projects, all of my collections I've built, containers I've built, all the individual playbook projects, and then here's my list of 113 roles and whether or not they're, so truly, when I like push my code, Jenkins runs a molecule test to test it, and we'll get into molecule. It's really cool. And update these badges and tell me if it works, right? Is it worth it? And so that's actually on Galaxy. They do the same kind of thing, right? Where'd the Galaxy go? Here. So they kind of do the same thing. A lot of people put build badges in there. Ansible Galaxy, when it imports it, does some extra like sauce to it to analyze it, like linting and stuff. And they give it a score out of 5. This is a 4.6 out of 5. So it's documented well. It's been downloaded a bunch. It passes all of its tests. And because Jeff's just a good guy, so why not give him a 4.6? All right. So we talked about
Let me interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
So about 20 minutes ago, Bruce was online and he said, what does SCM stand
Source control management.
for? Okay.
Yep. So, the most popular one is Git now, but you could use Version if you wanted to, or Mercurial or RCS. Oh boy, that's an old one. Yeah. Source control management. Just a generic term. And actually Ansible will reach out to Mercurial or Git. I think Subversion, you can do that as well. Yeah, you can tell it. I don't think they support RCS though anymore. So, all right, let's get back to, let's close out some of the old crap here. I'm gonna need to preview my role. We'll get into molecule here in a moment. I was still showing, already showed that. I have a tab problem, guys. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, here's my site inventory. So I said my role exposes a variable that you can set, and here I'm setting it at different levels in my inventory. Here I'm setting it at the group level. So I would expect that every host in this group prints out this message. And down here, I'm setting it for a very specific host. I would expect app3 to print this out, and these other guys will probably print out something else. And then down here, I'm doing it at a group level again. So this is the kind of the power of inventories. And so you can specify things here in the inventory file itself. I also find that this file can get big. So you can also use these special folders out here. So notice this, app3 is the name of one of my servers. It's defining the value for this role variable down here for itself. I also have a folder over here in a special folder called host vars called app1. Ooh, that matches this one. And guess what's in here? Aha, here's my little hello world message. So now he's going to say that, but I'll just say hello Oleg with just some weird stuff here. All right. And then likewise, you can do the same thing with group variables. And so for my load balancers, I'm just going to say, I'm not very creative, guys. Would buy, a bunch of expense. Okay, so let's run this playbook again. So we're going to go back to my playbook, and rather than targeting this inventory, I'm going to target this external inventory, and it's almost exactly like you'd expect. So we're going to say Ansible playbook plays number 5-I. Where's it at? It's out of directory in this here, and it's called site because it's not good. -E, or I was going to do a dash, I want more verbosity to see the output. So let's make this big lead before we run it. Oh, that's not doing what I wanted. Okay, here we go. Now let's run it. And so you can see it's visiting it's doing the play for the databases. Here's my database default message that's on the out. Here's, oh, look at that. App 1 said, hello, Oleg. But these other ones printed out their default messages. And I think at the end, the load balance one says something. I don't know. I might have done that wrong. Yeah, it's on there. It's somewhere in there. Nope, it said global default message. So I'd have to go look and chase that down. Horrible live demo. So that's kind of like playbooks and kind of structuring them, how to install roles. Collections are the same way. There's another, so do I have a collection? APO collections. I have a requirements file. Oh, I have no collections. Let's go find a simple one that I can install real quick. But you use collections pretty much the same way you use roles. So let's just go search. I can't find the search donger. Here we go. Oh, is there like a little prompt here or what? What's going on? Here we go. Ansible collection template. Why not? So we want to go grab that. Yikes. Okay, so now collections is a little bit different in the format. Now notice the roles format is just collections roles. So notice how this is like a YAML file and every entry is itself a list item. Whereas with the collections, it's slightly different. And they're going to merge all this at some point where you have to start it with this collections. And then this is the entry point of your list. So I would get rid of these empty braces. Oops. And I want to install that person's role. And so how would I install it? Ansible Galaxy is your friend. Ansible Galaxy collection install -r collections requirements -p collections. And yes, the force flag and everything else works. I noticed that collections are a little bit slower to install a lot of times, but let's go look and see what the result is. So now you'll notice you get this folder called Ansible collections. And then in the subfolder, you'll get all these namespaces. So this just happens to be this guy's name. And then in here, because I don't have multiple of them, are his individual collections. But you use them basically the same way as you use roles. So I'm still learning collections. I've written one. I kind of use, the collections I use are VMware, community.vmware for like their more advanced features. Windows, community.windows is a good one because we're a Windows shop. And yes, you can manage Windows with Ansible. But now let's transition over into Molecule before I burn up all the time remaining, whatever that is. All right, so we kind of know what roles are. They're these self-contained little nuggets. How do you author them and how do you test them, right? That's always the question. It's like, how do you test infrastructure as code? It sure would be nice if there was a mechanism to spin up fresh infrastructure, run your playbook against it, fix all the bugs, you know, and destroy it and bring it back up and destroy it and repeat that over and over until you get it right, right? And it sure would be nice if you could target multiple different platforms at the same time. Like, I want to test this against Enterprise Linux 7 and 8 and Debian 9 and Ubuntu 18 and 20. So that's what Molecule can help you do. So here's my hello world. Here's the kind of folder structure. Molecule will actually generate this folder structure for you with the Molecule init command. I just got lazy and copy paste one of my older ones. I typically include a docs folder for additional documentation. Here's the Molecule subfolder that makes all the magic happen. And I know that for me to work this, I've got to unset one environment variable. So excuse me here. I've just upgraded my version of Molecule and stuff. So, all right. So I'm going to go into my roles folder. So which is out one. Here we go. Clear. All right. So I'm in on the command line. I'm in this folder. Okay. So what does Molecule do? Molecule, like I said, allows you to test against all these different instances. It gives you faculties to create infrastructure. You can do linting and syntax checking on your role, which is helpful. Then you can apply your role to that created infrastructure in a step called convergence. Because if it's converged, then all these platforms should achieve the same desired state, right? If I apply Nginx to Enterprise Linux or Ubuntu, I expect to get Nginx on both. So that's why they call it converge. It can also do an idempotence check. It'll apply it a second time and see if there's any changes that happen. If there's any changes the second time, your role is not truly idempotent, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be. It's good to tell people that it's not if you expect changes to happen. There's ways around that too. It's for another talk. So idempotence. And then it can do a verification step. You can use another tool like Test Infra or GAUS or Ansible itself to verify that you're in your desired state. And then it will destroy and clean up everything, right? So let's see what that would kind of look like. So I'm gonna say Molecule -C, Molecule, my base configuration. And I'm going to do a list command. So this list command is going to show me all of the different platforms that I am testing this role against. So you can see, oh yeah, Molecule also supports all these different scenarios. So for every variable, right, that your role exposes that somebody could set, that's another degree of freedom you could test as another scenario. We're just doing the simple hello world one. So you can see right now, I'm going to use Docker as my method of creating fresh test instances. And in the default scenario, I'm going to spin up 3, test machines, 2 Ubuntu ones, 1604, 1804, and this is a CentOS 7 image, okay? And you can see currently they're not created and they're not converged. I haven't applied my role to them. So let's go ahead and create them. I'm just gonna say create. And so what's gonna happen in the background is actually pretty marvelous. If I go into my molecule folder and look at the configuration for the default scenario, I can see I'm using Docker as my driver. Okay, and I want to use Docker. And here's the different images I want to use. And so the image right here is whatever you can find on Docker Hub, right? You pass that in there. Here's what it's going to do in the background. It's going to download that image to your box as soon as you have Docker installed, by the way. If you want, I've got a role that installs Docker for you. So it's going to download this image, then it's going to do a little bit of customization. And once that image is in place, then it's just going to fire up new containers based on the image. So let's go look at the result here. So we created Docker files from the image name. I already have these images locally. I did that ahead of time, so you guys don't have to wait for these 100 meg downloads. It already is a compatible image, and now it's going to create these molecule instances based off of that image. So if you know Docker just a little bit, you can say, I can type in the right window, Docker PS. I can see I have 3 images running right now. Okay, that's cool. So now let's go back to my list command. And now you can see, oh, created is true. So molecule internally is keeping track. Have you created these or destroyed them? And then have you converged them or not? Okay, cool. What if I wanted to pre-inspect my thing before I converged it? There's another cool little utility you like. So I'm just going to copy the name of this guy, Control-Shift-C. I'm going to say, okay, molecule login host, paste that in there. Bam, I'm in that container now. And so this works with VMs. So I've spent a lot of time, I have my own custom delegated driver. You can write a delegated driver, which itself is a playbook, but we use that at Kiewit. So you saw me spin up these containers. You can spin up virtual machines if you want, right? So I've got a custom one that I wrote that spins up VMware machines if I want, because how do you test Windows, right? There's no Docker container for Windows. So we spin up VMs for Windows, and it all works the same way. You can do, we have one that does Azure VMs. You can use Vagrant with this, or VirtualBox and Vagrant to spin up virtual infrastructure. That all works. So now I'm in my container as root, but I'm just gonna get out of it. Okay, so we saw creating infrastructure to test against. Let's apply my role now, right? Converge. So here it's going to contact, it's basically running a playbook, my Converge playbook, against these 3 instances all at the same time. So in this case, I have to gather facts to determine what kind of system you are, because my role supports Windows and Linux, this Hello World one. And so here it's determined it's Linux. You can see it brought in the Linux task, said Hello World to them, went away. Let's go list again real quick. And aha, they're created, yes, and they're converged. Okay, we can run idempotence real quick, idempotence. And this will bark at you if any of these things change something that you the second time. It used to just kind of like run in the background, but now I think it prints more stuff out, if I'm not mistaken. It used to just kind of like sit there and hang, and then at the end it would be blank screen and you're good, or red and these tasks fail. But here it applied them, and it tells you at the end, idempotence completed successfully. It would list every task that was not idempotent, and that would be something you can go look at. The other thing you can do ahead of time is even before you create your infrastructure, you can say molecule lint. This will run YAML lint against all of your YAML files, and it will run Ansible lint. So YAML lint just looks for like YAML stuff, like indentation and nitpicky YAML things. And then Ansible lint looks for Ansible best practices. Like if you use the shell command, it's gonna say, you probably shouldn't use the shell command. why don't you use this one instead? So if you use the shell module to run wget, it'd say, why don't you use get URL instead? It would tell you that. And it would tell you what line number it's on, what file it's in, and then you could go change it, right? So this linting came back clean. So we did that. Okay, verification. I used to use Test Infra. I really don't believe in using the same product to verify itself. It's like Boeing saying the Max is good. I don't know. Yeah, so I used to use Test Infra. It was a pure Python-based way to do infrastructure verification to verify my Ansible stuff. But then I got lazy and just said, you know what, screw it. She's using Ansible to do it. So there's a better technique to do it though. Let's go look at the way that looks for a second. Molecule. I'm having a brain fart moment here. Oh, my shared folder. Verify. Oh, this is the world's crappiest example. I just assert 1 = 1. So there's strategies you can do in here. You can run the same task with check mode is true. Pretend you would have done it and tell me what the result would have been. So let's say in my role, I said, hey, make sure this service is started. Let's make sure NTPD is running, okay? In here, I could have another task that says NTPD is running, check mode is true, and then I could check, I could assert that did not result in a change. There's better examples, and I can provide them upon request, I'm sorry. But what that would look like here is just running the verify. And we'll run your verify playbook. I can provide you examples of using Test Infra. You have to know how to write Python though for Test Infra to work. But that way you could use a separate tool to verify your Ansible stuff. Okay, that all that passed. And finally we clean up, right? So we run destroy. And then I'll show you the piece de resistance at the end. There's a way to run all this in one command. Who can guess what the name of that command is? It's called test. So molecule test. So, and you can actually influence what this runs. So just to show you in here, you can go down here and you can define what your sequences are for create and check and converge and destroy. So here's my test sequence. I'm going to lint. I'm going to install any dependencies that this role needs. Remember, I said roles are self-contained, but they can depend on other, maybe this thing needs another role to run in the prepare playbook. So you can create infrastructure and you can even bring it so far as to where you want it to be before you apply your role to it with other dependent, tasks or playbooks. So this is what my sequence is going to do. If I run molecule test, it's going to do it all in one fell swoop. So why not? Clear. Oh, not in there. Clear. And so where test comes in very handy is when you, every time you commit and push this repo, if you got some CI on the back end, Travis or Circle or Jenkins or Azure DevOps or whatever your CI platform is, as long as your CI platform has the tooling around it, you could just run molecule tests and have it run these for you. And so it's doing them all. It's doing the linting and the syntax checking and getting those container images down and spinning up new containers and applying your role and applying it a second time and doing that verification. And it'll tell you return code will not be 0 if it failed in any one of those spots. So your CI platform should be able to tell you right away if it passed or failed any one of those things. And then obviously if your CI platform is worth its weight, the output will be captured and you can always go scroll back and kind of look through it to see where it bombed out. So yeah. I hope I didn't speed through that too much. It took me a long time to get here. I would say go home and play with it and see what you can do. If you want more advanced examples, so everything I showed you right here is just all doing the debug module, printing out hello world. It's the world's crappiest example, but you don't want to wait for VMs to get spun up and actually install Elasticsearch or whatever. That takes a while. But just to kind of like art of the possible kind of stuff, So that's like one of my simplest roles is just hello world. This role that I wrote here, add data disk, this one exposes to you, you can pass in a list of how many hard drives do you want attached to your machine. It works in VMware and it works in Azure as well, works in Google Cloud as well. Okay. It supports Windows and Linux. So it'll attach them to Windows, it'll attach them to Linux. It'll bring disks online. I can bring them in raw. I can do LVM. I can do Windows disk striping with storage spaces if you want. That one role does it all. And so all you have to do is set the variables the way you want and influence the way that role works. You can bring on one hard drive or you can bring on 10. And you can put them into volume groups or whatever you want. So that's an example of a role that is much more complicated, but I also use Molecule to test it all. Because how else would you do it, right? I mean, how else would you bring up all these machines and repeatedly beat them up all the time? So I think that's most of my talk, guys. Yeah, I hope I didn't, it's been about an hour, right?
Yep, yeah.
So we covered that, demos, we covered that. Where to find more documentation, same as my last slide before. And I can share these slides with anybody whenever they want. Molecule documentation, there's a Discord Ansible server, IRC, and GitHub, and Q&A time. So I'm sorry if I didn't look and see hands. I do answer questions during usually, but I saw I had a lot to do. So yes, please.
I was looking at, kind of the breadth of knowledge you have there. I feel like I find this stuff really interesting. Something I struggle with, I'm like spinning up VMs for events like Elasticsearch. I want to know how that VM works. I want to get really good at like pulling data from multiple sources, storing it, and also like retrieving it and going through it. But I also want to learn how to set up all these VMs. So like how all your VMs you have there, this is just kind of a personal question.
Yeah.
I guess, but I mean, do you specialize just in kind of the infrastructure, or are you know your way around all those other software tools?
Yeah.
As well?
You know, self-taught on a lot of the stuff, and it usually comes up when you need it, right? So, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. If you tell yourself you're gonna go home and hobby shop this yourself, you ain't gonna do it. So you gotta find a way to incorporate it into the workspace, right? So when I went to Kiewit, they're like, hey, we want to build servers the same way every time. Hey, I got your hammer right here, Ansible, I can do that. So that was what we were brought in to do. And now, whenever we make servers, VMs, whether it's in Azure or VMware, those are the two platforms we support. I don't care if it's a Linux or Windows box, they come out the same way every time. So they had a server build checklist, right? That's what Ansible is. It's a checklist. It's just in YAML format and something can interpret it. So I took their server build checklist and looked at it and over time refactored it. But eventually you get to the point where you can create and destroy stuff, right? Over and over again. And once you can do that, you're gold. Because then you can test, oh, let's try this Elasticsearch role I found online or this Apache role I found. And you don't need full on VMs to do that. You can do with a lot of stuff you can do with containers. If you're working with systemd and containers, I don't like unprivileged containers running or privileged containers running on my machine. Yeah, I would get into a place where you can maybe Vagrant and VirtualBox. You could create a VM on your machine with Ansible and Molecule to create it and then apply stuff to it. That's a more realistic scenario. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then once I can create machines and stuff at will, then I can go to the next level, right? Oh, okay. I've got an Elasticsearch cluster at Kiewit that's 40 VMs, right? 18 data nodes broke up into hot, cold, and warm storage with 5 masters and a Kibana server and all blah, blah, blah. Because I can create 40 machines on the fly, it was easy, set them up. And then I have a playbook that assembles a bunch of roles to install Elasticsearch on all these master nodes and install a different way on these data nodes, install Kibana over here. And you just refine that. And then you have this, honestly, I can get it down to a single like command line where it makes the machines, installs all the stuff, and you log into Kibana and you're ready to start ingesting data and doing stuff. So Yeah, and I do that with everything. So every time I do something once and I kind of learn how to do it, I'm like, I'm gonna write a playbook because I never want to have to remember how to do that again, right? It's living documentation. So that's, if you can get yourself into that habit, that's a good place to start. Any other questions? All right.
All right, thanks,
Great.
John.
All right.